What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. We got all of our tech ducks in a row, so to speak. It is Friday, August 5th, 2016. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. It's a very busy news day. A lot of stuff is going on. The lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 of the program. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phones when you call on in. And obviously we're going to be talking about the campaigns because there is so much going on, and the lies and propaganda and spin are just getting out of control. And everyone's trying to say, you know, what are Hillary's real accomplishments? And she hems and haws about that because every time she talks about Libya, everyone remembers the consulate at Benghazi. And she may be experienced, but it's all bad experience, from which apparently she's not learned any lessons. So there was an interesting article over an Investment Watch blog, the list of Hillary's accomplished. Her top 3 accomplishments, as far as anybody can tell, are avoiding being charged for sharing classified information on her private email server, including a list of undercover intelligence agents who were likely killed after their identities were compromised. Even FBI Director Comey admitted she committed felony violations of Title 18. But we're going to let her off the hook because, well, it's Hillary. We can't charge her. Now, Hillary's number 2 accomplishment on this list is receiving protection from the corporate media, which is attacking Donald Trump for manufactured controversies that are basically anthills compared to the mountain range of the Clinton scandals. More about that in a little bit here. And then, of course, not being questioned by the corporate media over what seems to be her deteriorating health condition and lingering questions over that concussion that she had. Now, the Clinton campaigners have decided to take advantage of the Pokemon Go game. They're literally arranging to have these little monsters that you're supposed to collect appearing inside Hillary's rallies to get people to come on in and stand there. Oh, my goodness. And by the way, apparently this is a growing trend here because we were at the shopping mall yesterday, and I couldn't believe it. August 4th, and already the Christmas stuff is starting to go up. And there was a sign in the front of this one store, "We have Pokemon monsters inside." So everyone's trying to lure people in with the Pokemon Go, and the Hillary campaign is doing the same thing. Now, there's an interesting little video, and it's on the front of WhatReallyHappened.com, and it's Hillary Clinton talking in Las Vegas, and she's interrupted by some protesters who managed to get inside, and immediately her Secret Service jump up around her, and one of them literally leans over and says, "Keep talking, keep talking, keep talking." And obviously, you know, there's an issue of security and everything. But even though Hillary tries to conceal it, watch her face. You can see a moment of real fear on her face. And that may be a healthy thing. Now, as you know, Hillary Clinton has been drawing a great deal of criticism for not having a press conference in something like 8 months. So finally, she decided to have one today. And as with everything else with Hillary, it's completely controlled. And the proof of that is no white reporters were allowed. Hillary Clinton had a press conference consisting solely of black and Latino journalists. So now look at who is being the racist. And anytime that Hillary comes on out and says Donald Trump is a racist for wanting to secure our immigration, you point out this press conference she just had. Whites were not allowed in. That's racism. Now, as you've probably seen all over the media, they're running these stories about Trump is crating in the latest polls. He's going downhill. He's down in flames. He might as well quit now. Blah, 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 blah. And remember, the corporate media admitted last week they have changed their polling methodology, which is a fancy word for we're now rigging the polls. And that's what they're doing. This is a variation on that Trump is quitting hoax. They're putting out these poll numbers to discourage Donald Trump supporters by creating this illusion that he is already losing massively. And it's a hoax. It's as much a hoax as the claim that he was quitting. Another story came on out where basically it's been confirmed. This Trump implosion quitting was completely manufactured by liberal media prostitutes and correspondents. It never came from the Trump campaign. It never came from within the RNC. They were attributing quotes to people that hadn't actually said what was going on. Now, Donald Trump is out there, as usual, playing to his huge, gigantic crowds. And he's out there, and the gloves are coming off. And he came on out and said, Obama and Clinton have single-handedly destabilized the Middle East. They've handed Iraq, Libya, and Syria to ISIS and allowed our personnel to be slaughtered at Benghazi. And then he goes on to talk about how they allowed dozens of veterans to die waiting for medical care that never came. And that's absolutely true. Then he goes on to say, Hillary Clinton put the entire country at risk with her illegal email server, deleted evidence of her crime, lied repeatedly, and Hillary's already all over the corporate media. No, I've been truthful. Really, I've been truthful. Honest, good. I have been really, really truthful. And so the gloves are definitely coming off. Now, as you know, the other day, we got to do a quick shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. We're talking about the campaign. We're talking about Hillary, Donald Trump. Open media bias in favor of Hillary. They are part of the Hillary Clinton campaign. They're even admitting it now. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes. But as you know, Donald Trump came on out and expressed his concern that the November elections are going to be rigged. And they've trotted out a bunch of experts to say, oh, no, it's impossible to rig an election. Elections are never rigged. And today, Obama himself waded on in, smirking on the face, saying, it's ridiculous to think our elections would be rigged. I mean, what kind of a wacko tinfoil hat kook wingnut conspiracy theorist would think there's anything funny about our elections? But when challenged on the president of the American Statistical Association's report regarding Democratic primary election fraud, he just sort of fades away here. So, in order to educate our obviously clueless president, we put up a bunch of links regarding election fraud in this country. It has been going on for a long time. There's no question about it. First of all, we reposted that video, Hacking Democracy, and you should send that to everybody that you know. This is a call to Rivero's Rangers. We need to have a fanfare to go with that now. This is a call to Rivero's Rangers. Take that video and take the other articles I put up, email them to everybody you know, put them all over your social media, and put it on out there and saying it's Obama who's being ridiculous, saying that the elections are not being rigged, especially with all the evidence that came on out from the Democratic primaries. So we put out Hacking Democracy. It's a feature-length documentary, very well received. If you cannot watch the whole thing, fast forward to 1 hour, 10 minutes, where they do the demonstration on how you can change the election results inside the electronic voting system and leave no trace at all. And then we hunted down some other articles. We found in Harper's an article from back in 2012, how to rig, how to rig an election. And it was going through the story of the 1932 scandal when Huey Long was committing massive election fraud and got caught doing it. And then we posted a link to the webpage for VoteScam. Now, VoteScam was a book written by the Collier brothers back about the time of Bill Clinton's first run for the White House. And the first 6 chapters of the book you can read on the website for free. And then if you're interested, you can, and I strongly recommend, you purchase the book. And then, of course, just a little while ago, we celebrated the anniversary of the Battle of Athens, Tennessee, which was all about crooked elections. And that triggered an armed civil uprising of the population to seize those ballot boxes and have an honest vote count. So, yes, election fraud is part of America's history. It's ongoing. So for Obama to get on up there and say it's ridiculous to suggest the elections can be rigged, he's either lying through his teeth or he's ignorant of American history, and I would not rule out both. So we made up a little graphic. It's on the front of WhatReallyHappened.com, and I encourage you to copy that and send it to everybody you know. And it's a photo taken this week of a Donald Trump rally, and it's a sports arena, and it's full. And there's another picture next to it of a Hillary Clinton rally taken this week, and it's just a small little group of people. And underneath it points out all the polls run by independent media websites like WhatReallyHappened.com have Donald Trump winning by a huge margin, which is supported by the photographic evidence of the rallies. So who is the corporate media polling to come up with their claim that Hillary's in the lead? Are they polling Hillary's staff? Are they polling the criminally insane? Is it possible the media might actually be lying to us? And yes, it is. Because we have another video that you need to look at on the front of WhatReallyHappened.com and copy off and send around. It's a clip from CNN where one of the commentators admits on air, and I quote, "We couldn't help her anymore. She's getting a free ride from the media. We're the biggest ones promoting her campaign." Let me repeat that one more time. We couldn't help her anymore. She's getting a free ride from the media. We're the biggest ones promoting her campaign. They're openly admitting in the corporate media they want Hillary, and to heck with what you, the American people, want. They're desperate to prove they can still control the outcome of elections, because if they can't, those multi-million-dollar salaries are going to disappear. And for everybody who's emailing me saying, "Oh, come on, the media is objective, the media is, they would never lie to us about what, blah, blah." Well, first of all, we have an entire page at my website of all the times the media has been caught lying. You know, the Food Line lawsuit, exploding GM trucks, Saddam's nuclear weapons. Of course the media lies all the time. So I felt it was a good opportunity to flash back to the story of the Fox News synthetic bovine growth hormone lawsuit. And in brief, basically what happened, Fox News assigned two reporters, Steve Wilson and Jane Aker, to do this kind of puff piece on Monsanto's new synthetic bovine growth hormone. It's great. It's wonderful. It'll revolutionize dairy farming or beef farming. But while researching the story, Wilson and Aker uncovered that people who were consuming the meat and dairy products from these cows treated with this synthetic hormone were coming down with serious medical issues. So they wrote up the report saying there should be caution here, and they gave it to Fox Management. Fox Management, under pressure from Monsanto, who was threatening to pull their advertising, ordered the reporters to change the story. The reporters refused. Then the Fox News tried to bribe them to change the story. When they refused, they fired them. Now, Wilson and Aker sued Fox News for illegal termination, and they won the initial lawsuit. The jury found that, yes, Fox News was distorting the news about this synthetic hormone. It was doing so for purely financial reasons, and the firings had been completely unjustified, and they ordered a huge settlement. Here's the part that really matters. Fox took the case to the Court of Appeals, arguing that because there is no law that requires corporate media to be truthful with the American people, it's okay for corporate media management to order their correspondents and prostitutes to lie to the public. And if the correspondents and prostitutes refuse, they can be legally fired for cause. And that tells you all you need to know about the corporate media's truthfulness. And once again, and I'm going to be putting this up, every other day or so. If the election were held today, who would you vote for? Hillary Clinton, 3%, Donald Trump, 97%. And you know something? Forget about my poll. Forget about the corporate media polls. Start talking to everybody around you. Find out for yourself who your friends and neighbors are really thinking about. Be your own best researcher. Now, the Department of Homeland Security has announced that they're going to take over protection of the U.S. election system. It's now part of our critical infrastructure, and we've got to take care of it the way we do all critical infrastructure, like the financial sector. Well, given the state of the economy and our current infrastructure, this is hardly what I would call a reassuring development. Meanwhile, Ohio State University professor Dan Tokaji is claiming that Donald Trump voicing his concerns that the elections could be rigged might lead to violent civil unrest, like happened in Athens, Tennessee. Well, I've got an idea, Professor. If you don't want civil unrest, don't rig the elections. Seems like a good idea to me if you actually believe in the principles of democracy. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Steve in California, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind? Steve in California.
Checking this morning, and I was wondering about this whole thing with the media's running with this, at least they did for one day, on Trump saying, why not use nukes? And so I did a little homework on that, and supposedly Joe Scarborough's part of this whole scam, this hoax, but I can't find anything whatsoever, no audio, no video saying that this was actually said and it's on record. It's simply per se, their say. Yeah. And I just want to know if you know any more on that, but that's what I found. I found nothing to confirm that to be a fact.
Yeah, we talked about that yesterday. Scarborough, MSNBC just made it up. And then, of course, when Donald Trump came out and said it never happened, they turned around and said, oh, Donald Trump's lying. We've caught him lying. Because he's denying this controversy we made up about him. But go back to that CNN video. They are openly admitting they are part of Hillary Clinton's campaign. And we have got to educate all the Americans we know that this is why they shouldn't be paying any attention to these claims that Hillary's leading in the polls. Because, I mean, that's where the fight is going to be.
Okay, 2 quick questions. I'll get off. It's on the website from RBN saying that Obama would not accept a Trump presidency. What do you make of that comment, and what do you think he has in mind? That's an odd comment.
That is a very odd comment. I mean, you can interpret it a bunch of ways. Maybe like Rosie O'Donnell and Whoopi Goldberg, he's planning on moving up to Canada, which would be okay. Or, maybe he's talking about finding some way to throw out the election completely and say, well, we're going to wait a year or 2 or 10 and we'll have the election again.
Yeah. Okay, last question I got for you is there any poll out there we can trust now that's not in government reach to look at the how this race is going between Hillary and Donald Trump? Any poll outside of government reach right now?
No. I mean, I would like to trust my own poll, but again, I have an audience that represents, a particular political point of view and demographic. Like I said, the best thing you can do right now is, first of all, tell everybody, don't trust any of those media polls. Start talking to your friends and neighbors about what they're thinking, about what's going on. And point out, the corporate media lies. The corporate media is admitting they're trying to help Hillary Clinton, and remind everybody the corporate media lied to us about Saddam's nuclear weapons. The corporate media is not unbiased. Tell them about the Fox synthetic bovine growth hormone lawsuit. There's no law that compels the corporate media to report the truth to the American people. They're there to sell you things. The next war, the next president, the next tax raise, whatever.
So a Gallup poll, is that under government control or not?
I don't know to how much extent. I probably ought to, over the weekend, take a look at what these other polling organizations are doing. But given how skewed the polls were during the primaries, it's hard to say that any one of them can be trustworthy. If any of them are suddenly seen to be trustworthy by the public, there will be immediately an effort to intervene or infiltrate or somehow rig or bias what's going on. Because the polls released to the public are not done to measure public opinion. They're there to manufacture it. And that's what they're trying to do with these poll numbers. Oh, Hillary's winning. You should be on the winning team. They're trying to generate support for Hillary Clinton with this claim that she's already winning.
All right. Hey, thanks, Michael. Have a great weekend.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. And we're going to let you go here. We're coming up on a commercial break. And we'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, as you know, there was a change of management over at Fox News. Rupert Murdoch is now in direct control, and Roger Ailes, I think, I don't have the pronunciation correct, Ailes, is now being considered as taking over management of Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Now, we know Roger is very much for Donald Trump, and he does know the media, and that would be a very, very positive development. Now, somebody did a video of a social experiment, and it's really very interesting. First, they went over to the Republican National Convention, and they had a guy walking around with a sign saying, "I love Hillary." And they videotaped the reactions of the Republicans to the sign. Then the same guy went over to the Democratic National Convention, walking around with the sign, "I love Trump." And they videoed those reactions, and it was quite a startling contrast. The Republicans were all polite. Some of them had their pictures taken with him. The Democrats were abusive. They spit on him. They tried to take the sign away. The Democrats have become the party of thuggism. Now, Hillary's campaign has had a little bit of a whoopsie, because over in Fairfax City, the mayor, R. Scott Silverthorne, who's a strong supporter of Hillary Clinton, and he's part of the Mayors for Hillary campaign, and he's mayor of Fairfax, suburb of Washington, D.C. He got arrested for allegedly offering methamphetamine to an undercover policeman in exchange for sex. The undercover cop was a male, and this mayor offered him meth for sex, and of course he got popped on that one. Are all politicians sickos? Is that part of the job requirement to hold elected office in this country? Did you just be really, you be a perv? Anyway. Another article, this is coming out of the Daily Bell. Hillary's real contribution to the presidential race exposes national security lies. And this article basically goes and does a quick recap of how national security usually means keeping the lies, frauds, and deceptions hidden from the public, whether it's the Cold War, World War I, World War II. And that's why you've got, like, all these intelligence agents are supporting her. This former head of the CIA is out there saying, Hillary will protect our national security. Well, she didn't do a very good job with her email server. So why is this guy on her side? Well, you need to remember something, and it goes back to what I called Hillary's doomsday machine. Hillary Clinton can blackmail the Central Intelligence Agency over the CIA's gun and drug running operation out of Arkansas, while Bill was governor, that eventually became the Iran-Contra scandal. Because there was actually a law against what they were doing. And I'm not just talking about illegal guns and cocaine. It was a law called the Boland Amendment, which said, we are going to stay out of Nicaragua. And the CIA went into Nicaragua with guns, bringing drugs back to fund it all. It was very much off the books, and all of it incredibly illegal. So, another article coming out of Investment Watch blog, and it asks the pertinent, relevant question. DNC emails, why no arrests? Guilty of treason, fraud, rigging the race for president of the U.S.? Is it now all perfectly legal for them to do that? Well, when you live in a dictatorship, of course, everything the dictator does is legal. The laws are only for you slaves, for you workers, for you drones. The laws are just to keep you in line. Laws don't apply to the nobility. Remember Ursa Bathory? She's the real-life model for what became the image of the female vampire. And she delighted in just finding creative ways to kill the peasantry. And she got away with it for so long because in the nation that she lived, in the time of nobility, the nobility were above the law. They literally had to change the laws of the country in order to arrest the Countess. And by the way, there's actually a lot of similarity between Countess Bathory and Hillary Clinton. I got a graphic that shows them side by side. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back in a few minutes. We got callers calling into the line. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and let's go ahead and grab some phone calls. Joe in Illinois, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Hey, I was wondering if you got a chance to listen to that John McCain, Tokyo Rose PSYOP tape that was from 1969.
Yes.
It was released last night, I heard it.
I haven't heard it yet, but I heard about it. And it certainly puts a different view on his supposed heroism during Vietnam.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, I can't blame a guy. Everyone knows he's probably tortured into making this tape and confession and stuff. And, you know, put ourselves in the same spot. You really can't blame him. You know, he's being tortured, but...
All right, hang on a second. Joe, why didn't the other prisoners make those tapes?
Right.
Okay? All right. All right, well, listen, thank you for the information. I'm going to locate the tape and go ahead and put it up. We're going to switch over to Claire in Idaho. Aloha, Claire. I've been waiting for your phone call. Well, I know what's on your mind. Talk to us.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for taking my call, and thank you for your coverage of the Jack Yanis case. The Attorney General released his findings last week, and I've been poring over these reports, and there's in particular one little part of one paragraph that I'd like to read to you. This is on page 160 of the report, section 3. Sheriff Stillman met me. This is a Idaho State Patrolman who's arrived on scene, and this is giving his testimony. Sheriff Stillman met me as I got out of my patrol car and started to tell me what had happened. Sheriff Stillman told me a car hit a cow on the highway, injuring the cow. Sheriff Stillman continued that the cow was put down by Brian. Sheriff Stillman said the owner of the cow comes up agitated, walks up to Brian, pushes him, then sticks the barrel of the rifle in Cody's stomach, and Brian shot him. You'll notice nowhere in that account does Sheriff Stillman mention any gunfire from Jack Yanis. Indeed, as Sheriff Stillman is handing the gun off to this trooper, he tells him, "I don't think it has been fired." And then some half hour later, Cody tells him that that the gun was fired, that Jack had fired at him. But mind you, this is after these two have been alone together for over an hour in the ambulance. So for the Attorney General to just pretend that this is all okay when this investigation was botched from the outset is pretty disturbing.
Well, what's disturbing is there were other witnesses around who are saying that Yanis did not in any way threaten those police officers. And my understanding is that one of them, the Wood, has like this prior history of extreme violence, including threatening some of his fellow sheriffs that he was going to kill them.
Yes. There's another deputy. We had one good cop on the force, apparently, and he's now in hiding. His own wife had provided a recording in which he was threatening her. One of the threats was the last person that pushed him to his limits was Jack, and you know what happened to him.
And they're putting these two back out on the streets, is my understanding. They never missed a paycheck, and they're going to be back out on the streets.
That's what we have been told.
Yep. All right, well, listen, Claire, do me a favor and keep us updated as to what is going on. It is one of, unfortunately, way too many of similar stories we're seeing all across the country about the out-of-control police departments just turning into this brutalizing force to try and terrorize the American people into submission. And it really is getting out of control.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, getting on back here. Interesting little article that came out of offguardian.org, and it's talking about how the Canadian media is now in absolute lockstep with the U.S. corporate media in echoing this idea that Russia hacked the Democratic National Committee emails, even though nobody has any evidence for it whatsoever. And by the way, Julian Assange has come on out and said it wasn't Russia. It was an internal leaker. Okay, so we know it came from within the Democratic National Committee itself. No, we'll blame Russia. We'll use this to demonize Russia. And the interesting thing is that this article is talking about the Canadian media is still allowing comments on these stories, whereas most of the American corporate media are starting to either load up their comment section with paid shills, or they're just shutting off comments completely. But up in Canada, the feedback, the comments being posted on their corporate media websites, the Canadians are just making fun of this and just mocking this whole idea about Russia did it, Russia did it, Russia did it. And we're at that point here where scapegoating Russia is now the answer to every single problem and crisis. No matter what is going wrong, it's Russia's fault. The economy is crashing, Russia's to blame. We're losing the war in Syria, Russia's to blame. We've got global warming, somehow Russia's to blame. I'm missing socks out of my dryer, Putin did it. Waxy yellow buildup in the corners of my kitchen floor, that was Putin relieving himself. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. It's completely irresponsible for the media to do this, unless you're in the context of understanding that the corporate media is the ministry of propaganda for the ruling elite, which CNN just admitted to. They admitted to it on air. They are promoting Hillary Clinton's campaign and just giving her a free pass on everything wrong that she's done. And you have to wonder how this guy gets to sleep at night without copious amounts of alcohol. Or maybe he just doesn't care. That's one of the scariest things about Hillary supporters. They know what she's done. They don't care. Now, turning over to the war zones, Aleppo is now completely encircled, and everybody's sort of digging in for what is going to be seen as the final battle for Aleppo. And once Aleppo is gone, or back under the control of the Syrian government, it's pretty much over. The United States just got this age's version of Vietnam, which is why they're going to ignore Syria and start bombing Libya. Forget about Syria. The fun is over in Libya. We're bombing them. And the corporate media is refusing to basically deal with what's going on over there. I mean, the U.S. government is out there saying, Bashar al-Assad, he's this evil tyrant, his people hate them, we've got to save the people from this evil tyrant. Bashar al-Assad has a higher approval rating than President Barack Obama. Assad won his elections honestly. The other thing the corporate media isn't telling you, this so-called moderate opposition is a myth. It's all one mass of hired mercenaries, some or more extreme than others, and the U.S. gives weapons to the so-called moderates, even after they're using chlorine gas on civilians, and just somehow, magically, they wind up in the hands of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And the Syrian army keeps taking over these outposts for ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they find crates and crates of American-made weapons. It's just nothing but pure USDA choice bovine excrement coming out of that corporate media. And the sooner the American people come to understand that everything coming out of that media is a lie, the better off we're going to be. Okay, let's take a couple more phone calls. Francis in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello. Aloha, Michael.
Aloha, snack bar.
I'm going to try and make this as quick as I can, but okay. I guess you've been preempted about this aspect of a film called Time Cop with Jean Von... I done butchered the name already.
Van Damme, yeah. I'm very familiar with the movie. They opened up against Stargate, and we split the sci-fi market that year.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, go figure. Well, I'm using that as a precursor of a question.
Yeah.
Now, what I'm wondering is, I would love to know what your thoughts are regarding, considering that as a premise, of something known as far as, I guess, quantum physics, or the thing called CERN or whatever. Have you ever heard of something called the Mandela effect, where various instances of, like, things in print are changed in the most subtle of ways?
I've never seen any kind of documentation. Of course, in the age of the Internet, things are being changed retroactively all the time. And
well,
we do know that let me finish my thought. When when published documents are reissued, very often there are changes. I mean, the way the original 13th Amendment vanished from the Constitution. What you're talking about is you have a book in your hand and all of a sudden the print seems to change. But you're not really thinking it all the way through. Because if somebody had actually gone back into the past and changed it, then your perception would be the book was always that way. You're never going to see the change. Because the whole time you were growing up, the book still looked the same. Think about it for a while, and you'll understand why that absolutely cannot possibly be.
Well, I thought I would ask you what your input was about that and what your thoughts were. So
That's it.
From a different perspective.
That's it.
So.
Okay?
Okay.
All right, thanks an
Have a
awful.
good week.
All right, we're going to switch over to John in Barbados. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael, yes. I sent you an email earlier today about Hillary.
Okay.
A careless, negligent presidential candidate with anger management problems.
Yeah, that's not a quality that we want to have in the White House.
Well, what I'm thinking is all presidents past have submitted some sort of health resume as part of their campaign, along with their taxes and other things. I wonder if we're going to get those from Hillary, because how will she explain all this money that's coming in?
Well, no, we're not going to get any of that stuff from Hillary, and you're absolutely right. I mean, when I was growing up and I was a kid, it was always being reported that the people being considered as candidates for president had to go through a party-sponsored medical examination to make sure that they had the stamina and strength to survive not only the campaign but the term in office, because having somebody die in office can be a real problem, you know, unless you've got another Harry Truman standing on the sideline. But very obviously at this point, Hillary is trying to keep her medical history secret. We know that Bill Clinton was trying to keep his medical history secret. In his case, it was probably because the stories about drug abuse leaving a permanent mark on him. But a lot of people are talking about Hillary's health. Now, this video of her with the head bobbing around, they're calling it a seizure. No, that's not a seizure. She's just hamming it up. Because if it was a real seizure, she would have fallen down. But she did have a stumble. She did suffer a concussion. There may be a blood clot in her brain. And what is very alarming, of course, is that Fresnel prism in her eyeglasses, which means that without her eyeglasses, her eyes cannot lock on the same object in front of her. And that could be the result of the concussion. It could also be a stroke right in the brain stem itself. That's a common symptom, where the eyes are no longer able to track correctly. So there is a legitimate question there.
The other legitimate question, of course, is in these negotiations, say, if she does become president, with Vladimir Putin, will she start throwing ashtrays around? Because she seems to be incapable of controlling her anger impulses. From what I'm hearing even from inside the DNC campaign people.
Well, I mean, Dick Morris has written about that. All of the people from Bill Clinton's administration were saying that he lived in fear of Hillary's rage. And we don't want somebody who's basically on the verge of turning into the Incredible Hulk, holding the keys to the nuclear weapons. You know, when presidents lose their temper, people get killed.
Now, just moving on to the war zones. As I was mentioning yesterday, there seems to be this competition between Iraq and Syria as to who can defeat Daesh first, ISIS or whatever they call themselves. The really important thing now is Aleppo, where they've taken over several quarters of Aleppo that were previously controlled by the Takfiris, the al-Nusras, the al-Qaedas.
Well, that last report, Aleppo's already completely encircled. There is no escape route. There is no supply line. They are besieged.
According to what I've been reading from the Syrian Arab News Agency, is that they've completely cut off all supplies, and basically they're taking it very easy because they know these Takfiris are wasting ammunition, shooting at anything and everything that moves. So it's not going to be long before they've completely run out. Yeah. That's the whole point of a siege. You surround them, you cut off their lines of communication, and then you just sit down and you wait until hunger and running out of ammunition wins your battle for you. It appears that Iraq's doing the same thing around Mosul now. They're closing in quite rapidly on that besieged city. So we're looking at the defeat of Daesh within a month or two. Well, that's okay, because the U.S. will just take them and drop them into some other place. In fact, apparently Iran caught some ISIS, Daesh, whatever they're calling themselves this week,
trying to sneak in there, which of course would give the U.S. an excuse to start bombing Iran. Oh, there's ISIS in there. We're not really making war on Iran. No, no, no. We're blowing up their factories and their water treatment plants and hospitals because ISIS is in there. It was interestingly enough, the State Department was on TV earlier today saying ISIS is now operating in 13 countries around the world. And, of course, it's only a coincidence that these 13 countries are places the U.S. wants to invade. It's just a coincidence, and anybody who thinks otherwise is being a tinfoil hat wearing kook nut conspiracy wacko.
And the election campaign continues to thrill.
Well, actually, I think terror right now, I mean, we're seeing this obvious push by the establishment. They are literally in a mindset of fighting for their very lives. More than their wealth, more than their power. A lot of these people are looking at jail time if an honest government is forced onto this nation.
Well, let's hope that happens, because that will be the best thing to happen to America in the last 70 years.
Well, hope isn't good enough for me. I'm actually going to work and try and bring it about here. But again, going back to that coffee mug we sell in our little online store, the fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force it to act like one where everybody can see it, and that's what's happening right now. The primary cheating, the corporate media openly admitting they're supporting one candidate. It's very obvious to everybody. We're seeing an entrenched establishment at war with the American people.
Well, I think the American people can be seen in action. Just look at the level of support in Donald Trump's rallies and Hillary Clinton's. There's just no comparison.
Yeah, if they remove Trump or if they steal the election from him, that could actually trigger an armed uprising in this country, just like happened in Athens, Tennessee. All right, John, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the Tantrum Squad is back on duty right now. My web server is under hack attack yet again. And so we'll let them roll around on the floor and kick their feet and pound their fists and cry and scream, and then the system will reset and everything will be fine again. Going on back to the phones here, George in Texas. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, how you doing, Mike?
Doing good.
Well, you know, the thing is, I've been hearing on Yahoo News, and I was hearing on the morning drive home from work this morning, on conservative talk radio talk about how Hillary Clinton is wooing the Republican voters.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she no more woos me to go out on a date with her. You know what I mean?
Well,
I wouldn't do it.
You know, they're trying to create this idea. I mean, the RNC is saying 98% of Republicans are behind Donald Trump, but this is more of that trying to hoax Donald Trump's supporters that they're on a losing side. And by the way, this is not the first time this tactic has been done. Okay, this is part of the toolkit. Remember, Hillary Clinton served on the Watergate Committee. She learned about stealing elections at the feet of the master, Richard M. Nixon, and she's using every single tactic he ever knew.
You know, Mike, do you have a Russian translator? You know anybody who could translate from Russian to English?
Yeah, I do. Why?
Because my friend from Russia sent me a special on in Russia. It was talking about the great things that will happen between the United States and Russia if Donald Trump is elected president.
Okay.
No, it's not. No, about the good things that would happen.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll tell you what. I do know somebody. If you'll send that to me, I'll send it off to them and see if I can get a translation of it. Okay?
Yeah, because basically, they went into the history how Russia, since the founding of this nation, has always helped the United States. The War of 1812, the Revolutionary War, the war between the states.
Yeah, Russia stepped in and helped us.
And I think in an indirect way, without interfering internally with our elections or internal affairs, I think Russia's in a way helping us too. Without, they're not hacking emails, but I really think they're helping us in an indirect way without interfering.
Well, I think certainly at Putin's level, he has to be very, very careful because he understands that America's political establishment and the corporate media are just looking for any excuse to be able to say he's interfering with our internal affairs, which is rank hypocrisy when you look at how many times the U.S. government interferes in the internal affairs of other countries. Iran in 1953, Chile in 1973, Ukraine, Yemen, Syria. It's like the U.S. government seems to have this attitude that they have a right to tinker with other people's countries, but nobody should have a right to tinker with the United States. And it is absurd. All right, George, got to let you go. We've got to take a break for station identification. Got 2 more phone calls waiting when we get back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're hour number 2. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're going to take one more phone call. And then we're going to shut off the phone lines for a while because I got a bunch of stories I need to get through before the lovely Lady Claire joins us. So we're going to go to Diana in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, thank you. Yes. I was a big fan of your website, What Really Happened, years ago, and I was delighted to find you again. I've been following your new program, maybe not new, but new to me, your current program for a couple of weeks now. So I was delighted to hear you mention the book Vote Scam. I had just dug out my copy of it a few days ago, and what they say is just as relevant now as it was when they wrote the book, particularly the part about exit polls and how that came about, and how easy it has been for decades now to hack into voting machines, including the ones from Jamestown, New York, which is supposed to be totally unhackable. Turns out nothing is unhackable. And their part about in the book about why exit polls were scrapped is also very interesting and very relevant reading. They explain how and why it was taken down, because they were too accurate, and it was too difficult to fudge the vote count in the face of these exit polls.
Well, this is one of the pardon me for intruding here. This is one of the reasons we know there were problems during the Democratic primaries, is they kept saying we don't need exit polls.
That's right. Yeah, it's an outgrowth of that. But they were scrapped quite a long time ago. Anyway, you mentioned the Victoria Collier article in Harper's. I happen to have that article. She is the daughter of one of the Collier brothers.
Ah,
and she goes into, the fact it's nice to know that the family carries on because both of them are gone now.
Yes.
So her article is by far the most exhaustive one I have ever seen on how votes can be changed. So anyway, I recommend everybody to look that up. I just double-checked on it myself, and it's still available online if you just Google Harper's Victoria Collier and votes. I have an unrelated question, and I do hope you don't mind my asking.
Go for it.
A couple of days ago, somebody called in with a question about chemtrails, and you seem to be rather irritated by that. Could you explain to me what your take is on that particular subject?
Well,
why you seem so irritated?
Well, because it keeps being brought up over and over and over again, and I have dealt with this issue repeatedly over the last 20 years.
Okay.
And I did take a serious look at all the so-called evidence being presented, and it all turned out to basically be mislabeled photographs and a lot of other material. But without going into the nitpicking situation, here's what it comes down to. Okay, spraying anything from 30,000 feet is a very inefficient thing to do. You know, when you look at crop dusters, they're down on the ground. When you look at the spraying for the Zika mosquitoes in Florida, they're down close to the ground. Doing something way up on high is rather a waste. And the so-called gridding of the skies is very easily explained when you realize that most of the cities in the United States have regular commuter flights that go back and forth hour after hour after hour, but the mass of air over the route is shifting. And so that's why each of the succeeding contrails of the airplane is spaced apart in regular intervals. It's really very, very easy. And again, there's a lot of nonsensical stuff being planted on the independent media. They are desperate to make us look like we're a bunch of nutcases so that people will be lured back into believing the corporate media when they tell you vaccines are safe and GMO is good for you and it's okay to drink the water in Flint, Michigan, and Saddam had nuclear weapons, blah, 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 blah. So the reason I get irritated is because we've dealt with this. We've dealt with the phony Apollo, the claim that the Apollo moon landings were faked. We've dealt with Bigfoot. We've dealt with UFO and aliens, and it isn't relevant.
You're sick of it.
I'm tired of it because it's not relevant to what we're talking about today, which is the political campaign. So when we're talking about politics and corruption and vote fraud and everything, and all of a sudden somebody calls in and says, HAARP is being used to change the weapon. You have to. The weather, what is their motive? Their motive is to derail the discussion and get it away from what somebody doesn't want it to be heard. Anyway, listen, Diana, thank you very much for the information on the Colliers. And it looks like we had a phone call come back that we thought we'd lost. That's Mark in North Carolina. Mark, you're going to be our last phone call, at least until the next hour. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? Mike, I was just on my way home, and I was listening to the radio on the way home. And they were bragging about the economics report today and all that. I always take that with a grain of salt. What do you think? They're just getting low-paying jobs, and they're probably a lot of illegal aliens taking these jobs and other immigrants, and they're just not saying it. Or
they're just flat out lying about everything right now. I mean, we know that job participation rate in this country among the legal citizens is about 70%. We've got 94 million legal Americans who are willing and able to work, who have not been able to find a job for months, if not years. The illegal immigrants and the refugees are only adding to the problem. Technically, legally, they're not supposed to work in this country anyway. So if anybody is hiring, they're in violation of immigration laws. And
but that's who they're hiring. That's who's probably getting those jobs, probably, right?
Well, if they are, they're risking jail time and the loss of their business if the immigration laws were being enforced, which under Obama they're not.
Yeah, but they're not. Yeah, like you said, they're not being enforced. But they're doing everything they can now to manipulate everything, flip the books and everything else. Now I understand, like the GNP was actually lower than expected, but it was actually manipulated a couple of months before. Make it look higher than it really was.
Yeah, I mean we've seen this pattern many times before. They'll come out with the GDP for the last quarter was higher than expected. It's way up here and everything is good. And then 2 months down the road they'll say, well, we have to revise that number back down. And they do it quarter after quarter after quarter after quarter after quarter. And right now the Federal Reserve, all the banks, all the financial regulatory authorities are trying to paint as rosy a picture of the economy as possible in order to support the incumbent candidates for office and, of course, to support Hillary Clinton by making it look like Obama's economy is actually working. When anybody can walk down the main street of their nearby town or city and see for themselves, things are not very good in this country at all.
Do you think people are seeing through them enough, or do you think people are going to eat it up and wind up putting that witch in the White House?
I don't think Hillary Clinton can honestly be elected to the White House, but she's getting ready to steal it. And the corporate media is going to help her because they don't want Donald Trump, because an honest government coming into Washington, D.C. would be the end of careers. There'd be jail time. They could unravel that whole narcocracy. And from their point of view, they're fighting for their very existence, and that justifies doing anything at all. We're fighting for our lives, so of course we're going to rig the election and lie, cheat, steal, and kill people. We're the victims here. Those American voters want to take our jobs away from us. So forth. Anyway, listen, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. We're going to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining our network, and we're talking about a whole bunch of things, but right now we're talking about Iran and this scandal over the ransom. And the U.S. government is trying to take the position that this was a settlement of some other kind of a deal or payment completely unrelated to the 4 Americans who were released at the same time this ransom was paid. And here's where it gets kind of interesting, because 7 months ago, Iran came on out and said the U.S. paid us a ransom for the release of these 4 Americans. And nobody was paying attention to it. Now, one of the released hostages, Abedini, is saying Iran held the plane with the 4 Americans at the airport until after that ransom plane arrived. And the idea that this is some kind of an above-board payment of some kind of an arranged debt falls apart when you find out the payment was delivered as plastic-wrapped bundles of cash on pallets in an unmarked plane. And Iranian television has now broadcast photos of these pallets of cash in multiple currencies. Now, Secretary of State John Kerry is trying to spin this by saying that, we gave the Iranians $400 million of your tax money because in the long run it was going to save you more money. We're right into Orwell here. You know, $400 million is going to save you. Warming is cooling. Winning is losing. Ignorance is strength. Freedom is slavery. War is peace. And they're just definitely going on with that nonsense. And again, if this payment was above board, why wasn't it sent as an electronic bank transfer? Or some kind of other certified cashier check? Bundles of cash wrapped on pallets in an unmarked plane, that's the sort of thing that drug users do. Drug dealers, drug lords. It was done in a way that was hoped would not be traceable. All right. Now then, over in Russia and Ukraine, things are getting very tense there. The president of the Republic of Donetsk, Alexander Zakharchenko, is basically warning Kiev that if they attack Donetsk, Donetsk is prepared to not just defend Donetsk, but push the Ukrainian army all the way back to Kiev. Things are getting very, very tense there. And remember, from the point of view of the people of Donetsk, they're fighting for their homes, their freedom, their families. There has been a huge problem with desertion in the Ukrainian army. They don't like the idea of firing on fellow Ukrainians no matter what the reason is. Now, there's another story coming on out from Global Research up in Canada. Apparently, the RAND Corporation, which is this multi-generational think tank that is relied on by the U.S. government, has been tasked with laying out scenarios for a coming U.S. war with China. And people who've been paying attention to U.S. military history, they understand RAND was the premier think tank for thinking the unthinkable. In fact, they came up with that phrase, nuclear war with Russia. And this idea that the U.S. could somehow win a nuclear war with Russia. I remember during that period there was one member of Congress, I forget his name, and he got up on the floor of Congress and said, yeah, if World War III leaves only one couple alive on Earth, I want that couple to be American. Which is not something those of us who are not that one couple really care to hear. But that does seem to be a bit of the mindset. RAND has been around so long, they even get made fun of. In the movie Dr. Strangelove, Dr. Strangelove, played by Peter Sellers, talks about, we've commissioned a study by the Blend Corporation, talking about mines and nuclear bombs and everything. So everybody knows about this group. They're the ones who basically draw up the blueprints for Armageddon. Now, part of the reason Joe Scarborough and MSNBC tried to concoct this idea that Donald Trump was asking, why can't we use nuclear weapons, has to do with what's called the no first use policy, which a lot of countries claim to abide by, including Israel, which has this thing about, well, we're not going to tell you if we have nuclear bombs or not, but we promise we won't be the first ones to use them in the Middle East. Gets a little weird out there. But apparently, a high-ranking U.S. Air Force official is basically saying that we shouldn't really formalize a no-first-use policy, that the U.S. may find itself in a situation of losing a conventional war with Russia and China, in which first use of nuclear weapons becomes perfectly reasonable for everybody not in the target areas, of course. So that's what they're thinking. They're understanding they may not actually be able to win, a conventional war against Russia and China. I've been looking at the specs of the various weapons, and to give you just one example of how bad things are, the latest generation of Russian air-to-air radar homing missiles has twice the range of the American latest generation of air-to-air missiles, meaning the Russians can start shooting down our fighters long before U.S. fighters get close enough to shoot back. That's a bad, bad tactical situation. And then there, of course, is the morale of the troops, which is not good after all these years of war. Coming out of Sputnik News, new report reveals suicide rate among U.S. veterans is skyrocketing. It has increased 32% from 2001 to 2014. And for some reason, it's primarily hitting female veterans. And, of course, veterans who are not being cared for by the Veterans Administration, which at this point is pretty much most of them. Because they needed the money for the new artwork, for the front lobby and the offices and everything like that. There's another video on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com you got to look at. And it's this State Department spokesman, and he's doing the press briefing, and he's in a good mood, and very obviously, is near the end of his tenure. So he was in a goofball mood, was welcoming these new interns to the press pool, to this ongoing exercise in transparency and democracy, at which point he cracks up and he starts laughing himself silly. And then one of the older reporters sitting in the room saying, really, I thought this was always spin and obfuscation. And everybody's laughing. They all know it's total bovine excrement. They can't even keep a straight face anymore. You got to watch that video. It's a giggle. Now, down in Israel, the U.S. is about to, to put it bluntly, compensate Israel for the Iran deal with the biggest military aid package ever. And Israel is saying it's not big enough. And Israel is also angry because they're angry that the Obama administration wants to end this provision that allows over a quarter of that aid to be spent inside Israel rather than the United States. See, part of all of this aid to Israel is that Israel will now come back and buy weapons from the defense contractors in this country. So it's all your money one way or the other. And Israel was allowed to spend 1/4 of it on their own military industries, and Obama wants to take that out, and Netanyahu is saying, absolutely not. In fact, we want to spend all of it here. It's our money. You gave it to us. We should spend it where we want. Meanwhile, there's another little bit of a wrinkle in all these negotiations, because even though Israel is accepting all this money from the U.S., they are still maintaining their ties with al-Nusra. And everybody's playing everybody over there. And it's hard to tell who's really friend or foe without a scorecard. Now, tomorrow is, of course, the very sad anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. And it should serve as a reminder. I'm sure there's going to be movies and documentaries about it, and you should look at them, to understand what is at risk if we allow this war party to continue ruling Washington, D.C. They're openly talking about first use of nuclear weapons. And most of us alive today, just like war on our own soil, a nuclear bomb is an abstraction. It's something we see on TV and movies. We don't have a real immediate comprehension of just how terrible it is. And remember, the bombs used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were minuscule compared to today's weapons. Hiroshima, I think, was something like 15 kilotons. Those B-61 bombs that are sitting in Turkey right now are dialable up to 370 kilotons, almost 20 times as powerful. And this idea that the Rand Corporation, at the height of the Cold War, was thinking that a nuclear war could be winnable, is the height of absurdity. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back with news of the economy. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before I get to the economic news, I've got to share something with you. As we mentioned earlier in the program, Hillary Clinton has finally given an actual press conference after 8 months. And it was controversial because no white people were allowed in the press pool. Only blacks and Latinos, which proves to us that Hillary Clinton is the racist in this presidential race. And Hillary probably had all these people vetted and thought they were all going to be very cooperative and ask the questions she wanted asked. And it certainly looked that way because when she took to the podium, everybody's cheering and applauding. They love Hillary. But it may have backfired on her just a little teensy bit because one of the reporters actually asked her about her claim last Sunday that FBI Director James Comey had agreed with her that she had been perfectly truthful with the American people and the U.S. Congress. And, of course, that was absolutely not the reality. And then they tried to back off and say, well, that was how Hillary recalled it all. She's got a poor memory. I mean, she doesn't remember anything from one day to the next here. And then that really wasn't making anybody happy, so they backed off again and said, well, this was merely Hillary's opinion that Director Comey had said she wasn't lying to Congress and the people. So her excuse today is she kind of short-circuited. That's the phrase she used. When she was asked that question and she was thinking about Comey, her brain kind of short-circuited. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, a president with a faulty memory whose brain occasionally will short-circuit and present a very distorted view of reality doesn't sound like a good idea. Not a good idea at all. And so I have absolutely no doubt that short-circuited is going to become part of the anti-Hillary lexicon. Vote for Hillary, she's short-circuited. Or vote for Hillary, she's forgetful. Vote for Hillary because America needs a reckless, negligent, careless president. All right, let's get on to the economic news here. Jason Barak is out there saying pretty much what's been obvious for a while. The next major banking crisis is starting in Europe. It's all starting to come down. And again, it's all because of that 11th marble. Private central banking, by design, produces more debt than money with which to pay that debt until the debt overwhelms the system and brings it down. And because of globalism, they're all going to pull down together. Now, apparently Obama was asked about the growing problem with default for student loans, which is now at academic levels in this country, because kids were lured into this idea that a college degree would mean higher wages and salaries with which they could repay the student loans, and that's not the reality. In fact, economists have actually done the math work and discovered that people who go into the job market right out of high school actually are economically better off than kids who go to college on those student loans. But Obama says, no, this is great. This is the way the economy is supposed to work. Apparently, student debt slavery is good for the economy. All debt slavery is good for the economy. As long as you're all slaves to debt, then the economy is fine and we will all be happy. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show on that phone call, under the Obama economy, 94,333,000 legal American citizens willing and able to work have not been able to find jobs for months, if not years. Our labor force participation, I had the number wrong. I said it was 70%. It's actually 62.8%. That is more than double the Great Depression of the 1930s, which maybe we should start calling the not as great as we were told Depression of the 1930s. And here's where we are from Barack Obama and the current U.S. government. After all the bailouts, GM is making cars in Mexico, and you can't drink the water in Flint, Michigan. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we get into the immigration and refugee nonsense, earlier in the show, I had reported on how one of the 4 freed American hostages released by Iran when that $400 million showed up in the plane said that Iran did not let the plane carrying the freed Americans take off until the ransom plane had landed. The spin now coming out of the Obama administration is it was simply an air traffic control issue, and it was only a coincidence that the plane that had to land first was carrying the ransom money. It could have been any plane. It could have been the Big Bunny. It could have been Air Force Two or whatever. It's only a coincidence. You conspiracy theory people out there, you know, I mean, rigged elections conspiracy theory. It's ridiculous. One good thing to note is how the corporate media and the government are now clearly on the defensive as this stuff is coming out. They're reactive. They don't have the initiative anymore, which unfortunately they can regain by setting off a nuclear bomb someplace. But they're in trouble, and I think they're finally beginning to realize it. All right, getting on to immigration. Support for German Chancellor Angela Merkel has plunged. 65% of the German people are not happy with her. There's no way she's going to survive her next election unless they start importing those Diebold machines right now. Diebold, elections delivered. Apparently over in Norway, there is this migrant that they're describing only as being of African origin, who's basically a suspect in a serial string of rapes. And apparently he went after this Norwegian woman, and 2 brothers intervened and saved her. But this kind of stuff is just happening all over the place there. Now, there's another article coming out of the Daily Bell. Remember that idea of the North American Union? We're just going to merge Mexico and the United States and Canada into one big economic union, just like the European Union. Won't that be swell? Look how wonderful that worked out for Europe. And a lot of people were opposed to the idea. So it kind of sort of faded away. But apparently now it's coming back, but it's got a new name. Greater integration. And maybe that's why they felt it was okay to run a Canadian for U.S. president. And why we have the president of Mexico just so happy to throw his underachieving citizens, to put it politely, across the Rio Grande. And by the way, I don't know that Trump needs to build a wall that's very expensive. Let's just put crocodiles in the Rio Grande and the problem will solve itself there. Now, as you know, tonight is the opening ceremony of the Rio Olympics. A lot of controversy going on there. And this bizarre story coming on out. Apparently the Washington Post, to deal with this huge flood of information coming out of the Olympics, is actually going to be using artificial intelligence software to write news reports and feed Twitter during the Olympics. And interesting. It's not a new idea. When I was in high school, I actually built a computer out of telephone relays. And I used it to generate a storyline for a short story that was published in the school newspaper. So that's not a new idea. But one has to wonder how this AI is going to handle some of the stories that we have coming out of the Olympics already. Apparently the Brazilian riot police had to use tear gas and pepper spray on protesters lining the route for the Olympic torch, which was run up to the Jesus statue, and tonight they're going to light that big Olympic torch during the opening ceremony. Another little embarrassment. Getting ready for the opening ceremonies tonight, Olympic officials had to literally cut their way into the stadium. They misplaced the keys to the main gate. That's a good one. And finally, another story. Apparently this Russian vice consul in Rio de Janeiro was driving along the street when a robber in a motorcycle attempted to rob him. This Russian vice consul grabbed the criminal, the robber, off the motorcycle, dragged him into the car, and shot him dead. Those Russians are tough. They don't mess around. Good for him. Now, getting on to, we have a phone call. We're going to go ahead and start taking phone calls again. Laura in Kansas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I have a question for you. I have recently heard about dark pools in the stock market, and I was just kind of curious. I was wondering if you think that the reason the stock market is so high or continues to defy logic is because the Fed is using dark pools or somehow is finding a way to manipulate the stock market to keep it high in order to get Hillary elected into the White House. And I'll let you answer that, and I'll take your answer off the air. Thank you, Michael.
All right, well, thank you. Well, first of all, there's nothing new with the stock market being rigged. In fact, it goes all the way back to Bill Clinton's administration when he formed what was called the President's Advisory Group on the Markets. Now, it's more commonly known as the Plunge Protection Team. And its job was, as the name suggests, to intervene in the market, to push the stock market up so that the Obama administration could use it as a banner to wave at the American people to say, look, the economy's doing great. And they've been doing it ever since then. And that's why the stock market has become disconnected from the economic reality of this country. And even worse, it has become hideously overvalued. Because the way they push up the stock market is with marketing forces, buying to create demand and let the numbers run on up. If ordinary citizens were doing what the Plunge Protection Team does, they would be in prison. It basically amounts to stock manipulation fraud. But it's okay if the president does it, as Richard Nixon used to say. So we know the rigging has been going on, and one of the ways they do it is simply to provide zero-interest capital to brokerages to buy and sell and manipulate the stocks. Another way that they do it is with these high-frequency trading systems, which the big brokers are allowed to use and ordinary people are not. They can be very dangerous. In fact, the first try of high-frequency trading drove the market into utter chaos. And that's when they banned it. And then all of a sudden, a couple of years ago, actually I think it was about 4 years ago, they started saying, well, we're going to let the high-frequency trading start again, but only for a selected few Wall Street brokerages. And so the market really is wide open to rigging. Now, on the issue of overvaluation, in theory, in an honest stock trading environment, the price of a stock is supposed to be reflective of its underlying worth, what its earnings are, what the dividends are, and the price of a stock is supposed to be a multiple of that value. Whatever it generates in a year, you multiply that by something like 16, and that's the price of the stock. When you manipulate a market through supply and demand, you start breaking that ratio, and the market becomes overvalued. And the danger of an overvalued market is really very, very simple. In the event of a correction or a crash, the prices of the stock are going to drop down to where the underlying value supports the new prices. And the more overvalued a market is, the greater that plunge will be. And when it happens, only the first ones to sell out will actually get their money back. Everybody else is going to be left holding a very impressive-looking report from their brokerage with an impressive-looking number at the bottom, and that's all it's going to be. That's all they're going to have, is an impressive-looking number at the bottom of a brokerage report. We saw the same thing happening in the crash of the 1930s, 1929. Manipulation to drive the market up after the dip they had in August started overvaluing the market. So that when the Black Friday crash happened, it was intense. Alrighty, getting on back to police. There's been yet another nasty incident down in Houston. This social worker was pulled over and for a traffic violation. And the officer who was issuing the citation was apparently belligerent and abusive, and she became afraid. And so she dialed 911 and said, can we get a second officer here because this officer is frankly making me afraid. And at which point closed-circuit television camera shows this officer who pulled her over getting physical, yanking her out, and then eventually charging her with resisting arrest. All she did, well, the officer said she crossed a double white line while driving. She says it didn't happen. But it's another example. If she crossed a white line, issue the ticket, let her go. Where's all this chest thumping coming from here? Now, a little bit of good news coming out of Virginia. The jury did convict the police officer in the fatal shooting of William Chapman. However, they recommended he only serve 2.5 years in jail. The police officer is white. The victim was black. It really is out of control. All right, we already covered the Yantis situation here. So let's talk a little bit about computers and computer hacking. It's becoming a major, major problem. By the way, somebody just wrote on in and said the 225,000 jobs they're claiming were created, those are all Hillary's added staff and her online shills and her computer goon squad, which we know they have. There's a separate PAC that has a huge budget, and they are basically waging the online war in support of her Hillaryness. We've been talking about the online advertising industry, and frankly, I think it needs to start policing itself. It's getting aggressive, it's getting intrusive, and I can tell that the people behind the online advertising industry don't actually have a lot of experience in advertising. Now, I worked a lot of years in advertising, because in the early days of computer animation, only TV commercials could afford that high dollar per second cost of the first efforts into computer animation. I worked at this wonderful company called Robert Abel & Associates. They were incredibly famous for what they were doing. There have even been museum exhibits in Japan about the work that we did back then, but it was very expensive. We were writing our own software, the hardware was expensive, and most of the work that we did in the early days was for TV commercials and network logos. Nobody else had the money. Movies really didn't have a lot of it, and certainly TV shows couldn't. Today it's different. Everybody can afford computer animation, and that's a good thing. It's a powerful, wonderful tool here. But I digress. The point I'm making here is very simple. When you work in advertising, after a while, you come to understand that being aggressive and forcing yourself in front of the viewers is a turnoff. They're not going to look at your ads if you're just shoving it at them as hard as you can. Advertising that works involves luring the viewer in with a question, with a riddle, with humor, with good photography. They have to want to look at your ad, or they're absolutely not going to respond to it. They're not going to click on it. And by the way, there's a lot of fraud going on with ad companies that charge per click. They've been caught many, many times just having their own little robots go on out and click their ads on the websites where they're showing. Huge amounts of fraud there. The big problem these days, of course, is malvertising. As you know, there are legions of cybercriminals out there who want to infect your machine for profit, for giggles, for whatever. And they understand most people have become very sophisticated with antivirus software. They don't open attachments from people they don't know. And so what these criminals will do, and it's another form of organized crime, they'll set up a legitimate front company that claims to be selling something like tea cozies. And then they'll go on out to the online advertisers and say, we're a tea cozy company, we're launching an online ad campaign, will you help us out? And the online advertising company will say, sure we will. They'll take them as a client. They'll put the ads out on the websites that are clients of the advertising agency, or publishers as they are of the advertising agency. And then the tea cozy company will quietly sneak some of their malware into the advertising. And that's becoming a major problem. Malvertising risk has increased by 400% just in the last 6 months. This is according to a security company, Risk IQ. There are now websites you can go to. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and post a couple of them to WhatReallyHappened.com, where you can type in the URL of a website, and it will try and tell you if there's malvertising present. But the authors of the malware are constantly changing it to try and evade, and there's absolutely no control on the industry. And the government's not interested in dealing with computer crime. Why? It makes money. And in the fascist states of America, what makes money is good, and what doesn't make money is bad. That's it. That's the entire morality of the U.S. government. Money is good, everything else is bad. At this point, and this shows you how out of control this is, ransomware has left almost 10% of British companies unable to operate. More than half of British businesses have been hit by ransomware, and 10% were left unable to operate. Remember, there's a new form of ransomware out there that's a hoax. When you get infected, it doesn't encrypt your files. It just deletes them. And you send in the money, and you never hear from them again. And the same U.S. government that insists you take their word that Russia was behind the DNC email leak can't do a thing about it, can they? Kind of seems like somewhere or other somebody's lying about that. If you are on Twitter, be very, very careful about clicking on shortened URLs. Apparently there is a new phishing tool on Twitter that is snagging 2 out of every 3 users. It's almost like somebody has declared open season on every computer in the world. Like they feel it's their property. Doesn't matter if you bought it. It's their property to come on in and make money off of you any way they can. And of course, even without malware, browser hijackers are a big problem because they're planting ads they make money off of on websites they don't even own. And that's another form of stealing. All right, got to take a break. Back with the next segment after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to do a couple of science stories. Over at CERN, at the Large Hadron Collider, which is going to be offline, I think, for 2 years. They're rewiring it to gain power. But apparently, last December, CERN announced they had found a new particle. Well, we found another one, and it basically set the physics world abuzz. They were looking at all the data, and they were saying, this is going to change our understanding of the universe. And apparently, they've now come on back and said that it was a mistake. It was a random statistical fluctuation, which tells you they're down there hunting in the noise. Now, real quick. CERN is famous for having found something they think might have been the so-called Higgs boson, the God particle, which they had to have to make the Big Bang Theory work. Because if the universe emerged from a single spot, it would have been literally the greatest black hole in the cosmos and unable to escape its own gravity well. So they came up with this wonderful idea. When the Big Bang happened, there were these 2 fundamental particles, and neither one had any mass at all. So there was no gravity, and that's why the Big Bang could just happen like that. And then after the universe was large enough to escape its own gravity well, how very clever, these 2 particles interacted to form matter as we know it that has mass and gravity. And the particle that adds the mass and the gravity was the Higgs boson, hence the name the God particle. It's another variation on the theme of epicycles. Now, one of the concerns I have about all of this is that, first of all, there's a lot of reasons to doubt the theory of the Big Bang. I've written an article about it. You can take a look at it online if you want. But particle physicists like to joke that studying matter with these colliders is like smashing 2 mechanical clocks together and trying to guess what the clocks looked like based on the springs and gears and levers that fly on out. Now let's take that analogy one step further and speculate that given enough speed at the moment of collision, individual teeth from the clock gears will break off and fly out as separate, distinct pieces. But obviously prior to the collision, they did not exist as separate, distinct pieces. Their separateness is caused by the collision. And the same could easily be true of the ultra tiny particles generated by the collisions of the Large Hadron Collider, including what we're being asked to accept on faith, mahi dictum est, as the God particle. We may be spending huge amounts of money studying artifacts of the experimental process itself and not actually finding anything that exists in nature. And nobody seems able to, or even willing to want to deal with that. Now, we're talking about Flint, Michigan, and the water. Apparently, the Flint mayor, because of the economic problems in Flint, has suspended garbage pickup, telling the residents to keep the trash inside until they can find another solution. All right, we're going to take a break for our top-of-the-hour network identification. Back with the lovely Lady Claire after these few words. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3, and for those of you on BAM User TV, and actually the listeners as well, know that sitting behind me is the gorgeous and lovely Lady Claire with her view of the world. So, lovely Lady Claire, what is your first story?
Well, this comes out of Sputnik, and it's a writer whose work I have a great deal of respect for. The gentleman's name is Pepe Escobar. And the article is titled, Hillary, Queen of War, the Roadmap Ahead. Now, toward the end of last month, something that one probably wouldn't have imagined would happen. High-level Saudi generals meeting with high-level retired Israeli generals. And you're thinking, wow, these guys are supposed to be at each other's throats. But we have to remember something. In the Middle East, there is a phrase, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So what were they talking about, if I were a little fly on the wall? The possibility that Hillary Clinton could get elected, and against whom would she possibly want to go to war? And they're both thinking, oh, make it Iran, because she has made statements in the past, Michael, that if elected, she would do everything in her power to get in there.
Yes.
But there's a little fly in the ointment, not a fly on the wall, a fly in the ointment, which is Erdogan on Tuesday, the 9th, is meeting with Vlad Putin in St. Petersburg. And what he is talking about now in a dramatic shift away from NATO and the West is a Russian, Iranian, and Turkish alliance.
Yes, he's been talking about his willingness to work with Russia and Iran to bring peace to the Middle East, meaning that they're going to say this U.S. meddling and intervention, it's gone on far enough.
Yeah, and it would completely trump, pun intended, any of Hillary's plans to attack Iran to make Israel happy. I've got to hand it to Putin. He's got to be one of the smartest guys in the room when it comes to geopolitics. It looks like at every level he's 1,000 chess moves ahead of President Obama with everything he does. He's able to think out and do long-term strategic thinking, which, unfortunately, our politicians are not able to do.
Well, we're not raised with that culture of chess the way the Russians are. I mean, Americans are into poker and hearts and, thumping the chest and everything. Mm-hmm. And Russia, of course, has produced some of the greatest chess champions in the world. Mm-hmm. They're legendary for that.
Yeah. And there has been a comment by a senior Iranian lawmaker regarding Syria, that the gains in Aleppo will be the turning point to resolving the crisis. And it looks like the U.S. is not going to get its regime change in Syria after all.
No, it isn't. In fact, I think Syria is about to become our generation's version of Vietnam.
Yeah. And I hope you were wrong on that, but I can see where,
well, why would that be a bad thing? I mean, let's face it. If the U.S. gets kicked out of Syria and Iraq, mm-hmm. that whole plan to conquer the Middle East that Wesley Clark leaked is derailed.
Yes.
And along with it, a rush to a potential nuclear war with Russia.
Right. No, I mean, it's good in that way. But I would like to hope that the current and whatever future administration we will have will realize we've got problems here we need to solve, rather than regime changing in other parts of the world. The other article that I thought was interesting, it's an interview of Jim Willey in When the Hits the Fan.
Yes.
Yes. And the way that he's describing the unwinding internationally, the entire house of cards is crumbling, and the empire is more desperate than ever to hold it together. And Jim Willey, in his report, is saying that we are close. I don't know that it's happened yet, but we're close to the U.S. dollar being refused in international trade.
And that will be the end of the U.S. economy because we've let our manufacturing decline in quantity and quality, and nobody wants our GMO agriculture. And these attempts to arm twist the rest of the world into accepting our products and our agriculture through the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, those are starting to fall apart.
Yeah, absolutely. And even as the scenario gets weaker and weaker for the U.S. in Syria, there have been a couple of neocons who are promoting a wider war on Syria with drone and cruise missile strikes. And
we had that former Obama advisor came out, I think it was just yesterday, and said, let's just drop all this pretending that this is about ISIS and Al Qaeda and just go ahead and do a decapitation strike on Assad himself.
Yeah.
And John Kerry came on out and basically had given, it's now overdue, he literally handed a deadline to Assad to begin the transition of leaving office and making way for the U.S.-approved puppet regime.
Or else.
5 days ago.
And if I were ever to meet Dennis Ross, and I'm not likely to invite him over for tea, I'm sorry. The guy's just not coming over. But I would really want to ask him about the 3,000-pound gorilla in the living room snoozing on the Bösendorfer. And that question would be, Russia's got a very significant presence in Syria. How would Russia respond to U.S. strikes of this kind of nature? And I have to wonder if this guy believes that a war with Russia would be a good thing for the U.S. to do to get al-Assad out. And if this government, because it is very much panicked that there may be a Trump presidency coming up after November, my sense is that they are going to be willing to give Donald Trump, if he does become the president, the worst possible scenario, which is a completely crashed economy and war somewhere that they will have gotten us in so deeply that it's going to be almost intractable for the next president to withdraw from.
That could very easily happen when they reach the point where they understand that no amount of election fraud is going to put Hillary in the White House. They could crash the economy and start the war and stick Donald Trump with it. We saw that once before with Herbert Hoover. The history you were taught in your school probably blames Herbert Hoover for the 1930s Depression. But Herbert Hoover did not create that depression. It was created for him. Yes.
He inherited it. And the interesting thing about Israel, and you were earlier talking about its ambiguity about its nuclear state, but its monopoly on weapons in the Middle East just went kerplunk when Erdogan locked down the Incirlik U.S. NATO air base last month. Now, my guess on this is that Erdogan is going to let the troops go, but he's not going to let the nuclear weapons go.
It's a very delicate situation. Now, if the U.S. is convinced that Erdogan cannot actually use the nuclear weapons, they might send in a commando force to retake them, or they might basically just say, give them to us or we're going to invade outright. But again, with the physical weapons in his possession, it's only a matter of time before Erdogan's technicians are going to be able to get around the fail-safe mechanisms and be able to actually use and deploy them, and that will completely change the dynamics of that part of the world.
Particularly if there is this alliance between Iran, Russia, and Turkey. That's going to be a humongous difference.
That's going to be we don't know where this is going to go. None of these world leaders, except for Putin, none of these world leaders are really thinking all that clearly. And that's one of the scariest things about where we are right now. The entire future of the human race is in the hands of whichever world leader is the least mentally stable. And a lot of them qualify for the rubber room and the straitjacket right now, and so does Hillary.
Yes. And leading on that thought, there was a wonderful article by Stephen Lendman, whose work I like. Stephen comes from maybe a little more progressive side of the aisle, but he writes with very straight logic and very passionately. And it was, what countries will Hillary attack if named president? And he goes on to say...
everyone she thinks she can get away with.
Yeah, It's terrifying to consider what actions an emotionally unstable neocon leader may do as a U.S. president, a notorious war hawk, a Wall Street tool, beholden solely to powerful moneyed interests and controlling her and her husband, Bill. And Lenman goes on to characterize her as militantly anti-Russian, anti-Chinese, anti-Iranian, and anti-peace. And he also encourages us to ignore her gender and duplicitous rhetoric. And goes on to say that a second Clinton presidency would be disastrous. Perhaps homeland tyranny and global war with nuclear weapons threatening everyone.
Well, she's going to do that in her first administration. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And again, if Hillary steals the White House, she's going to come down hard on freedom of speech, the Second Amendment, because she's going to understand the American people are not going to just sit down and say, oh, well, she stole it fair and square, let's go back to work. And if she thinks the independent media is a problem now, it's only going to get worse with the American people. And so she's going to find some way to try and shut it down. For whatever, she's going to have to become a dictator to survive the circumstances of her grabbing power. And go back and look at history of every ruler or ruling body who usurped the nation. Immediately was followed by tyranny and absolutism.
Right. And I think with Stephen's headline, the better question would be, who wouldn't she attack to please her money backers and Israel? Iran, China, Russia, Monaco, Liechtenstein, Andorra? But of course for people like Clinton.
Tasmania.
Yes.
We're going to make war on Tasmania. It's got devils down there. Holy war on Tasmania.
But of course for people like Clinton, it's always other people's kids who conveniently get blown to bits or maimed for life in the pursuit of these endless, horrific wars of conquest. And they're not about freedom, honor, glory, or preserving the American way of life. These wars are all about increasing revenues for private profit.
It's all about moving the money around, taking it away from the general population, and piling it up over the rich and powerful. And war is a great way to do that. I mean, if you go back and you look at World War II, the so-called captains of industry, these were that generation's versions of the money junkies who volunteered to manage America's industrial base to support the war effort. And then when the war was over, they literally destroyed all the records, took everything that had been manufactured as if they owned it, and started reselling it. That's why there was this wonderful war surplus market after the war. And you could get some really great things.
Oh, I bet.
You know, at a bargain basement price. But ultimately, all of it came out of the taxpayer's pocket.
Yeah. There was another article that I thought was very thoughtful today that came out of antiwar.com. Obama, Clinton, and a permanent state of war. The never-ending bloodshed that no one wants to talk about. And the writer reminisces about on election night in 2008. He was outside of the Rutgers dorms in New Brunswick, New Jersey, where Barack Obama was declared the winner of the election, and college students poured out in a spontaneous celebration of the victory of hope and change. And their joy and exuberance was contagious. On that night, even the cops embraced them. And the author says, I have to wonder where those millennials are today. How many are unemployed, have put up plans to get married, are stuck in low-paying jobs, or still living with their parents stuck on the treadmill that is their student debt?
Well, they're out of hope and they're living on spare change is really what it is. And again, I would hope that the current youngest generation would heed the advice of the sadder but wiser electorate that says you shouldn't believe anything that's coming out of Hillary's mouth or the government or the corporate media because they're there to sell you the status quo. They're there to sell you the continuance of the establishment. And as Susan Sarandon said so eloquently, a vote for Hillary Clinton is a vote for the status quo, and the status quo is not working.
Right. And he says 8 years later, that candidate, Obama, provided perfect continuity for the war on terror that was started by his Republican predecessor, except the civilian casualty list is much longer and the theater of war is much wider. The U.S. government, in its pursuit of these bloody preemptive wars of aggression, in order to secure resources to which it has no moral right, coupled with the extrajudicial assassination of people with without any due process, appears to be absolutely engineered to create more wars. This has and unfortunately will have blowback at home. People around the world in resource-rich areas don't hate us because we're free. They hate us because we've assassinated their wives, kids, grandparents, aunties, uncles.
We've blown up their cultural treasures. We've destroyed their cities.
Yeah.
I mean, there are websites where you can go on out there and you can look at Baghdad before the U.S., and it's a beautiful city. It's clean. It's gleaming. Baghdad after the U.S., it's a ruin. Same thing with every single other one of these nations. Before the U.S. got there, these were wonderful places to live, high literacy rates, people were happy, and afterwards it's just ruination. Libya is a good example.
Oh, yeah.
And Gaddafi had raised Libya's literacy rate to something like over 90%. That's better than here in the United States.
Yes.
And they had virtually free gasoline for their cars, you know, major social programs, free college education, and then, of course, he starts talking about that golden hour, and that's a threat to the American bankers, so let's go on in and kill Gaddafi and bomb Libya back to the Stone Age because nobody defies the private central banks. And remember, one of those leaked emails that came on out confirms that golden hour was one of the major reasons why the U.S. went in and smashed up Libya. Here's where it's really, really sick, okay? The United States is not the greatest nation on earth, if it ever really was to begin with. And it's not able to improve and advance itself. So it has fallen back on the old idea of simply wrecking every other nation in order to appear to be a superpower. It reminds me about one of the times when Steve Martin was on Saturday Night Live, and they did this skit about the cavemen. And Steve Martin was the intelligent caveman who was saying, you know, we can encircle the animal, and that way we can kill and everything. And the leader of the cavemen, when they're all asleep, goes over and bashes in the Steve Martin character's skull. And then stands up and says, "Me now, smartest one." And that's exactly how the U.S. is working right now.
Yeah.
They can't improve our infrastructure, so let's bomb the rest of the world's infrastructure so that ours looks good in comparison. That's literally how psychotic the U.S. government has become.
Yeah. I have a very bright first cousin who is professor emeritus of constitutional law at a very prestigious university, and we talk. And one of the things that he said to me, Michael, consistently, is that if the U.S. had put a fraction of the money they put into the war in Iraq to develop workable alternative energy, these wars wouldn't be happening.
Well, in the context of people who think the wars were all about conquering the oil, that's true. But the wars were not about conquering the oil so much as dictating what currency the oil was traded in.
I know that.
But we know that the war spending is completely out of control. I mean, for the cost of the war in Iraq, we could have clean, safe drinking water in our faucets everywhere in the United States of America.
Yeah.
But from the point of view of the government, it's more important to go on out and blow up other countries than it is to provide a safe, healthy environment for Americans and their children. That's literally the decision that they came up with.
Yes, yeah. I'd like to bop over to Syria for one more note, and then also about Pakistan. Apparently, Obama at the Pentagon said that the Syria mess is all al-Assad's fault.
Well, what do you think he's going to do? Stand up and say, "We messed up, my bad"?
You know, but I mean, it's
Go
really,
ahead, vote for Trump. We really messed this war thing up.
It's really ironic. 2 years ago this very week, President Obama informed the American people that he was launching targeted airstrikes to protect our American personnel and a humanitarian effort to save thousands of Iraqi lives who were trapped on a mountain without food and water. And there was no chance of this very limited rescue operation expanding, and he assured us, as Commander-in-Chief, I will not allow the United States to be dragged into fighting another war in Iraq. And here we are, we're back in Iraq. He is blaming Syria for the war that we have set up against him and trying to create regime change.
Well, in his mind, it may be true. You know, this is all Assad's fault. If he would just do what I tell him to do, you know, we would leave him alone. But he insists on acting like he's head of his own country, and that just cannot be allowed.
I know. The guy continues to lie with impunity, but even more terrifyingly, appears to have withdrawn into his own parallel universe when it comes to taking any personal responsibility about the flusterclucks which he has either enlarged, like Afghanistan and Iraq or Libya.
All right, we got to take a break for commercials here. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we are taking phone calls. The lines are open, 800-313-9443, and your next story is...
Pentagon has chosen not to pay $300 million owed to Pakistan. Apparently, the U.S. owes some $300 million in military reimbursements for Pakistan under the Coalition Support Fund deal, in which the Pentagon agrees to reimburse certain nations for costs incurred supporting U.S. wars. Pakistan is normally a large recipient because of the protracted U.S. occupation of Afghanistan. But they're not going to see it anytime soon because Congress has recently moved to condition all funds to Pakistan on the Secretary of Defense certifying that Pakistan is taking military action against the Haqqani network. It's a terrorist network in Pakistan. Now, that's not to say that Pakistan isn't doing this, but rather Secretary Ash Carter simply doesn't seem to intend to certify it one way or the other anytime soon.
Well, it's because they had to give that money to Iran to get those hostages back. I mean, come on. There's only so much money left. We've given most of it to Israel.
I know. But it boggles the mind that the U.S. government is perfectly fine sending crates of millions to Iran in an unmarked aircraft to ensure the safety and return of political prisoners, yet is unwilling to pay a promised sum to Pakistan. And it demonstrates to me that we've got more than a little schizophrenic thinking going on in Foggy Bottom. I don't know where I heard this, but I remember hearing or reading one of the most valuable things you can do as an individual or government is to keep your promises. And when the U.S. doesn't do this, it loses credibility, not only with the country it's dealing with, but all over the world.
Well, that's certainly true. I mean, in the world of business, that's still valid today. If you get a reputation for not keeping your promises, you're not in business for very long, and I think that's one of the reasons people are responding to Donald Trump, because our current political leadership lies about everything, from the moment the sun comes up to the moment the sun goes down. And what we're seeing with all this very bizarre information, like it's okay to give Iran pallets of money, but we're not going to pay our legitimate debt to Pakistan, is because the government has indeed become badly factionalized, and you have all these little operational groups with their agendas, and they're only focused on what they're trying to do, and that's why from the outside the perception is confusion and chaos, and that's making a lot of people very, very insecure right now about the potential for the United States as a whole. We're going to take a phone call here. Alex in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Alex,
hey, Michael.
There you are.
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here. Hey, I can't help but to think of George Carlin right now and his theory that there's only one system. I don't believe Trump is real. There's no way he can be, or he is a fool. He is not qualified for the job if he can't beat Hillary Clinton.
Well, I think in an honest Alex, listen to me. In an honest election with honest polls, Trump would be winning in a landslide. We saw it all during the primaries. Hillary is resorting to massive election fraud. She's got all the big money people on her side. She's outspending Donald Trump on commercials 100-1. She did a big media buy for the Olympics, and still is barely keeping up with him. And apparently even the rigged polls that they've had over the last week to show her pulling ahead, those margins are starting to close according to the latest numbers I'm looking at. Maybe you don't like Trump, and they're emphasizing people don't like Trump. Yeah, but do you really like Hillary? I think maybe for a lot of people who have been brainwashed into thinking Trump is no good by the corporate media, start thinking of the election not in terms of who you're voting for, but who you're voting against. And look at that. Look at that trust issue. Look at that trust issue of Hillary Clinton that she's dealing with. Look at her long line of corruptions, the dead bodies. She's making excuses saying that her brain has a short circuit, that she's got a faulty memory. And the FBI says she's reckless and negligent and careless. Why would you want to vote somebody with those failings into the Oval Office? Okay? I mean, what's Donald Trump really done? He made the illegal immigrants feel unwelcome. Boo, hoo, 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 hoo. All right, so if you don't like Donald Trump, switch the paradigm. Who do you want to vote against? And that's going to be Hillary Clinton. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And what is next on your list?
Next on my list is an article from antiwar.com. Chelsea Manning's death won't be enough for the state. This act of punishing Manning for her failed suicide attempt is just another cog in a brutal machine of torturing Manning for her perceived crimes. Last year, Manning was nearly thrown into solitary confinement for possession of some LGBTQA+ literature and, wait for it, toothpaste. There is no end to the control the state wants over Manning and the people like her, because Manning symbolizes something that they very much want to crush: rebellion. And a government that is obsessed with control cannot allow Manning to live, or at least not in any real way. And perhaps, Michael, the most damaging thing the military prison has done to her, they've denied her, a trans woman, the necessary medical help so she can deal with her dysphoria. And the denial is, in fact, part and parcel of why Manning attempted to commit suicide in the first place, along with other factors we can barely imagine. And my guess, Michael, is that this additional punishment, and if they do throw her into solitary, will lead to her suicide.
Well, see, what's obviously going on, starting with Lieutenant Aaron Watada, is they're trying to make examples of people who are daring to resist what's going on in this country on moral grounds.
Right.
Because Aaron Watada invoked the Uniform Code of Military Justice to refuse to obey an illegal order, and they just tried to destroy him. Now, he didn't suffer as much as Manning did. Manning released videos, leaked videos of U.S. forces committing war crimes, and they're trying to basically make a horrible example so that other soldiers who are witness to these war crimes will not come forward, which is telling us that, yes, the U.S. continues to commit war crimes, you are just not being shown them.
Right, right. And should she succeed in a suicide attempt, the government is risking making her a martyr for people who believe in the military conducting themselves in the right and just way. That's, that's going to be what's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, it's an ugly time. There's no question about it. I don't know about you. For people who are my age, and at my age I realize there's fewer and fewer of you. In fact, these days we're buying our condolence cards by the box. But when you were younger, did you ever dream that you could see the United States in the condition that it's in right now? Did you ever dream that you would see the government exposed for the horror it has become? I certainly didn't.
I didn't either.
I grew up in a hereditary Republican family. Grandpa was drinking buddies with Richard Nixon. And I bought all of the Kool-Aid that I was taught in the state control school about what a wonderful country this is. And over the last 2 decades, I have come to understand what is really going on in Washington, D.C., and it is ugly in the extreme. What's your next story?
Apparently, China's top court issued a message about the South China Sea last week. And, of course, the jockeying for position and who gets what and who can do what is not anywhere close to being over, in spite of the court decision. On Tuesday, China's top court said that there was a clear legal basis for China to safeguard maritime order, safety, and interests, and to exercise integrated management over the country's jurisdictional seas. The regulation states that those who engage in illegal hunting or fishing in China's waters will be pursued for criminal liability. Now, this doesn't sound that crazy to me.
No, it doesn't. And, of course, China is rejecting the Hague's decision and relying on the Cairo Convention, which was signed at the conclusion of World War II, in which all of the signatories, including the United States, acknowledged those islands were historically part of China for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Japan had seized them, and the Cairo Convention said Japan has to give them up, and they go back to China. Okay? And nobody really cared about these islands before, and the United States doesn't care about the islands now. What the real issue is the rising influence in the world of the yuan, especially since China is now in a position to back it by gold.
Yes.
And that is what the war is really about. The island is just an excuse.
Yes.
Just like the Lusitania was just an excuse. Just like Pearl Harbor was just an excuse. Torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. These are contrived excuses for public consumption. The real wars are about economic domination of the world.
Right. And the U.S. and other forces playing picador in the South China Seas are attempts to goad the Chinese government and military into a shooting war. And, Michael, this would be terribly unwise at this point. And I say that because right now the U.S. military doesn't have the weaponry, the troop strength, the money, or the manufacturing to ensure a positive outcome to a conventional war with China. We just don't have it.
Well, there is certainly no way we could ever hope to invade the Chinese mainland.
Oh, no.
And the Chinese have no real interest in invading the American mainland. They have the manpower. They don't have the ships.
Yeah.
But once there is a shooting war going on, the U.S. can turn to all of its other allies around the world and say, see, you can't use the yuan now. You have to go back to using the U.S. dollar. Okay?
And the weapons procurement process in this country is nothing short of, I've got to say it, incestuous. The representatives get funding for their campaigns from the same weapons companies, hungering for those lucrative weapons contracts, which are ultimately greenlit by those same congressional representatives. And consequently, when they're delivered, they frequently don't work as advertised, to the point of being obsolete upon delivery, are horrifically late and obscenely over budget. And, Mike, for me, what's wrong with this picture? Everything. Everything.
It is insane. It's war for profit. And their profit, your kids get killed and crippled. And you know something? In terms of the mindset of the American government, it doesn't seem like we have really evolved as a civilization from the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
It's all castles and plundering and looting. And it almost feels like, despite the achievements of our civilization in the last century, that we are already slipping into a whole new dark ages. And that is a terrible, terrible, fearful thing.
Yeah.
Because after Rome fell and they slipped into the dark ages, look how long it took for them to come out. From the fall of Rome to the beginning of the Renaissance.
Yeah.
Are we looking at a repeat of that? I hope not.
I also hope not at all. There was some very interesting conversation by the former CIA chief who smacked down Donald Trump and endorsed Clinton. And we need to find a little bit more about this gentleman, Michael Rivero.
Okay.
And what he said was that Trump exudes traits that suggest he would be a poor, even dangerous commander-in-chief, Morell wrote. Now, this has got to be desperation on the cusp of madness. Also, as reported at ZeroHedge.com today, we see some interesting things about Morell's background. He presents himself as a bipartisan warrior. Not true. He's been looking for a position in the Hillary administration for 3 years now, since, if she gets elected. He won't disclose his ties with Hillary. He was an active participant in Pain to the Benghazi attacks as caused by the YouTube video. And when Hillary Clinton says best information provided by the intelligence community, she's referring to her guy who was in the CIA, Michael Morell.
Now, he sort of gives away what's going on when he says that Trump doesn't have the qualities to be a commander-in-chief, because what he's admitting there is it's the war agenda.
Yeah.
Donald Trump has come out publicly saying that as president, he wants to go back to being friends with Russia and China and trade with them. Peace through commerce. Mm-hmm. And for the war hawks, that's his disqualification right there. Mm-hmm. The problem that I think Donald Trump is not paying attention to, and the war hawks really are, is the fact that the U.S. doesn't really have anything left that anybody wants to trade for. Mm-hmm. You know, we don't make good products. They're hideously expensive. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. We actually, if Trump, let me rephrase that. When Trump becomes president and we go back to being friends with Russia and China, we're going to have to really focus on rebuilding our manufacturing and our technology. We're going to need a peacetime technology incubator so that we can create new technologies on which to base new products and industries. Because right now, all the technology incubators are military, and they don't release what they develop for 20 years, by which time it's useless in terms of a commercial product. Mm-hmm. So, you know, that's where we are. The money junkies got us into this situation of needing a world war to perpetuate, and I'd like to avoid that war. But we understand that if we avoid that world war, that's not the end of it. There is still work to do, and that's bringing back the manufacturing, mm-hmm. getting back to natural, organic, clean agricultural products that the world wants to trade for. Yeah. We have to make our products desirable to the rest of the world, not force them to buy them at the point of a gun.
Right. The other thing he said... yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Are we at the end of the story?
Not quite.
All right, finish the story, and then we got a phone call.
Good. He also stated that when he was deputy director of the CIA, that he was with President Obama when we killed Osama bin Laden in 2011.
Well, there's a whopper for you.
And, apparently Mr. Morell is either singularly unacquainted with the fact that Osama bin Laden died of complications in December of 2001, or he is lying through his teeth.
Well, I mean, even Fox News reported Osama bin Laden was dead. Then they pulled the story back because, we're not going to let a little thing like Osama bin Laden being dead and his usefulness, as a monster to wag at the American people.
And the guy that got killed in Abbottabad was some poor schmuck. And they couldn't dare let people see the face of the body because it certainly wasn't Osama.
No, they dumped him in the ocean. And then they flooded the Internet with all these hastily done phony pictures to try and prove they'd gotten bin Laden, which were all ripped to shreds by this retired visual effects expert living on Oahu.
Yes.
And at which point they said, we're not releasing any more pictures out of respect for the dead.
And then the people in SEAL Team 6, which conducted the raid, as stated by Biden, died mysteriously in a chopper crash after being fired upon in Afghanistan, allegedly by the Taliban.
Okay, well, listen, we're going to take a phone call. Fred in Utah, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, thank you for all of you for doing hard work for everybody.
Thank you.
When I listen on the radio, I listen this Obama's lecture in, what's that called, that convention, Democratic Convention.
Yes, the convention.
There were so many problems with it, but one of them really, I'm sensitive about it, because I've served homeless vets from Afghanistan and in what's that called, Iraq war also, for 17 years in San Diego. And one of the reasons I was so sensitive about that, because when I went there years ago, I became homeless for 6 months to get a job. So that it gave me such a knowledge. So I'm very sensitive. And he said, we have reduced the number of homeless almost, the word almost, in half. But he did not say at all how many. No number. Now, if I'm an average person, every day working hard, you don't have time to listen to anything, they don't have no idea. The truth is, it used to be 110,000. Now it has dropped to 65,000 homeless vets. It's shameful. And he just said, I said this in that black man, very good man, Jesse Lee, who has Peterson, Jesse Lee Peterson from Los Angeles.
I know of him.
On his program. So this is one topic, that how he lied a big time. The other big lie was from Bill Clinton. which everybody knows they are so comfortable by lying. But when it came to CHIP program, for those people they don't know, children's health insurance program, he said Hillary Clinton did this for children, this for that children, and finally approved in the Congress or whatever to pass CHIP program. I have been watching C-SPAN for all the time, and one of the reasons is because I love to learn good pronunciation from the senators, all of those people. It helps my English. Now, I remember Senator Kennedy for years was struggling for that. Senator Paul Weston was struggling for that. And then Senator Hatch, Republican from Utah, and Senator Kennedy, they were the main force that they passed that, because Senator Hatch convinced all of the Republicans it's a good program, because if we spend $1 for a child who is sick, we will save $10 in a long time. So Bill Clinton gave the credit to Hillary Clinton.
Yep.
Well,
so
if you go back and you look at Hillary Care, which is one of the many Clinton scandals, it was an epic disaster. It was an earlier version of what became Obamacare, and it was not about health care. It was about taking more money from the American people and giving it to health insurance companies. And again, a lot of what we're seeing now is just an enlarged version of the first Clinton administration, which was in turn an enlarged version of Bill Clinton's governorship of Arkansas. And we can see the pattern quite obviously. And frankly, I will be very ready to not have that go forward into the presidency after November. Yeah, and I'm getting all these emails and say, oh, well, Trump is this, Trump is that. Stop thinking about Trump and think about Hillary. If you don't want to vote for Trump, get out there and vote against Hillary. Think about those 4 dead people at the Benghazi consulate. Think about how she bashed Gold Star mother Pat Smith. That was unconscionable. Think about how Hillary is excusing her lies by saying her brain is short-circuiting, that she's forgetful, that she's got mental... Think about how the FBI director said she's reckless, careless, and negligent. Think about how all of her closest associates say she has an uncontrollable temper. And then think whether you want somebody with those personality traits in the White House. And with the nuclear codes. Yes. Yeah. Okay, Fred? I guess we lost Fred. All right, we're going to let Fred go. We got to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, welcome back to the last segment of our program today on this Kaahumanu Friday. And Claire, you had one more story you wanted to share with us. Yes, I did, and we put up the video, and it shows Israeli border police terrorizing an 8-year-old Palestinian little girl and stealing her bike. Well, for the moment, the guy's been suspended, and it shows actually 2 officers terrorizing an innocent 8-year-old. They took her bicycle, they smashed it up in front of her. Yeah. She ran home crying, and then they just threw it in the bushes. Yeah. Now, the police officers tried to justify what they did by saying this 8-year-old Palestinian girl was on a Jews-only road. How could she know that? You're not supposed to be there. Your kind belongs over there. How could she know that at 8 years old? And if the signage is in Hebrew, she can't read it because she speaks Arabic, for heaven's sakes. But if you say Israel's being racist here, then you're just a dirty, filthy anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the ovens. Oh, I mean, there's no justification for this. There's no justification. Even if the kid is not supposed to be there, an appropriate response is, hey, can you go a little closer to your own home? Yeah. But again, it's more proof. Israel is an apartheid state, like the failed South Africa. Yeah. And you know what's really angering? Your tax money is building brand new, modern, Jewish-only roads in Israel, while our roads are crumbling into ruin. Just think about that for a while. Yeah, it's pretty frustrating. And this got some interesting press. The Nicaraguan president has removed political opposition from Congress and nominated his wife as vice president. I'm sure Bill Clinton is saying, why didn't I think of that? Yeah. Anyone remember Daniel Ortega, the former guerrilla fighter who rose to fame by removing the Somoza dictatorship, is now creating a dictatorship of his own. Nicaragua also has presidential elections in November 2016, and Ortega will run for his 3rd term after changing the constitutional term limit.
Evidently, Ortega is the overwhelming favorite, given he has banned the main opposition party from running.
That's a good way to do it.
Moreover, last week he removed all political opposition from Congress, essentially guaranteeing unanimous support from the legislative, judicial, and executive branch. He stands alone.
Now, remind me, wasn't Ortega the guy who was put into control of Nicaragua following that whole Iran-Contra gun and drug running thing?
Seems to me that I remember that. Yeah.
Well,
and, and why this is getting such a stir in some of the press is funny, because the U.S. is absolutely no stranger to political dynasties, as witnessed by the rise of the Bush family and the Clintons.
And before that, the Kennedys, and before that, the Roosevelts.
Yep. And just one more thing very quickly. Multiple studies confirm that people who swear often and stay up late and are messy have high IQs.
I got 3 out of 4.
And perhaps your friends perceive you as an insomniac slob who swears too much, but they probably haven't heard the good news. Studies suggest that these traits are a sign of intelligence. Popular mythology frequently equates swearing with low intelligence, limited vocabulary, and lower social status. But a study by psychologist Kristen Jay of Marist College and Timothy Jay of the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts dispels those stereotypes. Well, that's comforting.
Well, I mean, face it, if you're using profanity, obviously you've got a larger vocabulary than the people around you. Makes sense to me. All right, there's the music. Time for Claire and I to get on out of here, get something useful done with the rest of the day. Have yourselves a really good weekend, but do make a point of copying off all this information from the website and start emailing it to your friends and family, because social media is coming under control and they're starting to really filter. So have a good weekend. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.